Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attentiveness, your presence. I'll be conducting the panel in English. My panelists have discretion to use which language, Arabic or English, as they please. The panel is titled The Business of Food in Egypt. As we all know, on the 25th of January 2011, Egyptians took to the street with the slogan, bread, freedom, and social justice. 2 years down the line, we don't have bread, we don't have freedom, and we don't have social justice. It's the reality. So, based on that, I have experts with me on the panel that will discuss the issues that Egypt is facing and an outlook on and recommendations and suggestions on what we can do to start providing people with the basic necessities of bread. In the meantime, we know that there has been applicable taxes on many commodities, the removal of subsidies on a lot of commodities. Inflation is taking its toll on the Egyptian economy and food prices. We keep in mind that almost 40 and above people, 40% of the Egyptian population lives under the poverty line. And if the 25th of January revolution was undertaken by the youth of this country, the middle class, let's say educated, probably the next incident that we will see in this country will be a revolution of the poor and the hungry. So without further ado, with that opening, as positive as it sounded, I will start with Doug Anderson, Regional Director of ACDI VOCA Egypt. They have been doing a wonderful job pre-revolution. We don't hear too much about it. Very much involved in helping out small farmers in different parts of the country, providing them with technical assistance from the type of seed that they should grow, when to grow it, things to that extent. Doug, you have seen pre-revolution business of food in Egypt. How is the post-revolution business of food in Egypt, in your opinion?
Thank you, Ashraf. Yes, I have. I'm going on 15 years here now in Egypt, and been predominantly working with USAID-funded projects in the food sector, agribusiness sector, and to a lesser extent, we've been doing some private sector work as well with producers and extractive industries. I can say this, let me just paint a little picture of who we are. We've been here for 30 years in Egypt, ACDI VOCA has. I joined them in 2006, and prior to that, I had worked with a private sector food processor. Prior to that, with 526 food processors for 6 years. And so we took the food processed exports from 62 million in 1998 to it's now I think around 3 billion, probably a little bit more. There was a Fresh Pack project that was along the same, it was a sister project, and they took exports from 26 million to 1.7 billion. And so that gives you an idea as to what the potential is of Egypt. I think it's a veritable greenhouse. There's only 2 other places in the world like Egypt. One is the southern coastal plain of Peru, and they need to pipe water there about 1,000 kilometers. But this is where a lot of your asparagus comes from in the off-season, the counter season. And then the other is the Sahel, and it has the soil and the climates and the water, but it doesn't have the infrastructure. And so then we come to Egypt. If you go north, it's too cold. If you go south, it's too tropical. If you go east, you're in the monsoons. So Egypt and its geographic platform here enjoys really some considerable attributes that I think Egypt is overlooking. And even after working with these processors and growing their exports to $3 billion, they're still only working at 30 to 50% capacity. And the reason for this is that they're not linking their supply lines into the south. And if you look at the production opportunities in the south, you'd be absolutely amazed. And if you correlate that season, the winter season in the south, they have the soils and the climate and the water, and they have a willing community of producers too. But if you look at that and then you look at the counter-season opportunities in Europe, it would just absolutely astound you. And so there's a considerable opportunity to expand and utilize resources in Upper Egypt to to benefit all of Egypt and their economies.
Yesterday, I had a colleague from the United States Embassy here, and we had a side discussion regarding GSPs while we were talking about qualified industrial zones. And it's something I just want to touch on at the very beginning of the panel, just to get it out of the way. I just want to document it, basically on GSPs. What governs our exports to the United States, agriculture exports to the United States? What is the GSP, and how could more producers take advantage of it? If there's any advantages to be taken.
Well, it's more than just the United States. The GSP is in effect worldwide under the WTO, and so your exports to Europe also benefit from the GSP. The GSP is the general system of preferences, and it establishes favored nation status to trading partners, and it establishes preferential treatment for tariffs. And to give you an idea as to how that works, a lot of dehydrated onions, which we really established here on this processing project, actually goes to Israel and then into the United States, because under the GSP, Egypt's tariff on dehydrated onions to the United States is about 28%. Israel, because they have a free trade agreement, is zero. But that said, that's an exception. Most, if not all, of Egypt's food exports do enjoy preferential treatment under the GSP.
Thank you very much, Doug, and I'll come back to you on a couple of other points, but I'll continue with Dr. Herb Majdi, and I love having you on our panels because you are one of the best indicators. Carrefour is one of the best indicators of price sensitivity in the market, consumer demand, purchasing power parity, price sensitivities. And you see that. You see a lot on both, the consumer side and on the supply chain side. Now, we were supposed to have the Minister of Petroleum join us on the next panel. Unfortunately, he's not going to make it. I actually got something with me for him to give me some petrol going back home. But you know that there's an increase in the prices of gas removal subsidies on the fuel. In addition to that, the lack of availability of fuel and its impact on the prices of our food and your specific business. Please.
Thank you, sir. To produce, we need energy, we need utilities, we need a lot of other things. Today the situation is, if the government, I'm not here to teach anything to anybody, but government should attract more the productivity today, should appoint a little more experts in order to see what are the problems and where, and how they can resolve those problems. And since the revolution, we all were witness of change of maybe in some ministers 4 persons. As soon as you are shaking one hand, the person is changing. I think we need a plan. And I fully agree with Douglas that despite this big amount of export, $3 billion US, this is only 30 or 40% of total capacity that this population, this respectful country can produce. So I think energy is going to cause big problem for coming few months. This should be absolutely focused by government, by responsible people, by experts. I'm talking about, let's say, consumer energy, but on top of everything, water will be another headache very soon, very soon, because the production is not going to satisfy the need of the future. We are talking about very populated country with growing population, about 2.3% of demographic croissance per year. We are talking about 1 million population more year after year. So I think these people, they will consume. We have to provide them that they will consume. To provide that, they need to have the energy to produce. We are running, just to resume this, we are running sometime between 5 to 7% of out of stock because lack of production, lack of logistic. The truck driver, instead of delivering, is waiting on the queue to fulfill his tank and to deliver. And you have to adapt your logistic, your organization, and on top of everything, we have to focus on something named security. Okay, so all this is causing some kind of problem today, and honestly, I'm not really afraid because Egypt is too big to fail. And this, I hope I can never see this here because I love this country. But it's a time, some people to focus more and more on these issues.
Doctor, let me ask you this question, just so we can, cover both sides on the security level. Are there any incidents in Carrefour stores in Egypt that are notable that due to the security something happened? Hopefully nothing happens, but was there any vandalism? Did you suffer in your locations any kind of impact due to the lack of security?
Thanks God, no. Because we increase our security team, we take special decision to have special, let's say, facilities to avoid the risk. We are not going to wait for the risk, we have to anticipate the risk. And that happened after the revolution. Was only few things that are done by Bantagi people who they are not representing Egyptian population. So, but of course when I'm talking about security, yes, a friend of me, head of one dairy product company, he cannot anymore let his trucks goes out of the factory before 6 o'clock in the morning. Otherwise, he should have 2 persons inside with something to do. All these parameters are going to affect the image of, let's say, Egypt. For the investors, we are here, we love this country, we talk a lot about fundamentals in Egypt, and the fundamentals is still here. Large population, young population, geographical situation, etc., etc., etc. But in order to have more actors, in order to resolve other problems, and to help to focus on coming problem, potential problem, yes, I think it's time to focus on this.
Just in 30 seconds, let me ask you, because since yesterday and today, what we're trying to do is establish the relationship between the current government, if you want to call them a regime, and the private sector. So my question to you, with all of your concerns, who in the government have you portrayed these concerns to, and what's the type of dialogue that the current government has on economic issues with a large company and organization, international organization, such as Carrefour?
I can tell you this, not only for Carrefour. We are co-chairman of French Chamber of Commerce, and we are, at least in a monthly basis, we are talking and analyzing the situation for French Egyptian companies here in 2 words. One of the biggest problems, as I mentioned to you, it is the rotation of ministers, deputy ministers, etc. This is one thing. Another thing, thanks to Gafi is doing very good things. And at least Gafi is attracting investment. That puts you in the shoes of foreign investors. Legal structure is not perfect. Banking system, finance system is changing every month or twice a year. And all these parameters. So I'm not telling you they will turn their face to Egypt, but they will wait some more time. I think one more time today, the biggest challenge here it is to provide energy in right price, and to do that, I think another problem is very important to be focused on it. It is how to manage subsidies consuming 51 to 52% of GDP of this country, And as you know, in agricultural products, we are talking about wheat, we are talking about corn, we are talking about a lot of other category of items. But please don't forget, for the Egyptians who are in this room, the revolution of bread that was happened many years ago. And really, I don't want to be witness of revolution of hungry stomach, you know. So we have to really not to advise the government, to invite them to focus more on private sector, to appoint more experts, and to organize more and more this kind of respectful, let's say, assembly.
Thank you very much. I will move to Mr. Mujahid Ashuri, who is the FAO representative in Egypt. And here I'm going to have a multi-point question for you, especially on water, if we can move a little bit from food to water. As we all know, over the past decades, we have done something really, really sad, and that is to build on our agricultural land. And you don't need to go far, actually. We are on agricultural land right now, so is Muhaddithin, so is Ma'adi, and so are all the different, what we call ashwayat, or if you want to call them slums or projects, despite the fact that they're not slums, by the way. I mean, there are 16, 18-story buildings with elevators and, you know, then, after we did this, we came up with the notion of let's go and build farms or put farms in the desert. We've sort of turned it around. You know, we're using our agricultural land to live on, and we're trying to go out to the desert and do something with it. Now, the problem is much bigger than that. We know that our water comes from the sources in the south of Africa. And there are major issues that are going on with the Nile Basin countries who are our friends and our partners, but we have put that file aside for the longest period of time. But today, like Eric was saying, we are reaching critical points of water. How do you see this? And what has changed in the attitude or the approach towards the Nile Basin file and our water resources and the scarcity of it pre-revolution, and what's changed post-revolution, and where do we stand today?
Thank you, Ashraf, and thank you for the organizer to invite FAO for this important event. I guess, first of all, when we talk about food, I guess most of the time, I mean, we talk also about security, food and food security. FAO, as you know, our mandate is mainly to deal with agriculture and food security. When we talk also about food, we talk about production and we talk about consumption. And when we talk also about food, we talk about everybody. Everybody is involved, everybody is concerned. But we talk also, and you mentioned one of the resources, what about land resources? And we are in this part of the world where we are really facing a shortage on both land and water. I guess if you take Egypt having 55 billion cubic meters of water, using for about 8.5 million faddans. But still, we do believe, and we heard yesterday and today, many of the presenters, let's say, of speakers, talking about potential, but also talking about strategies. I guess the potential is there, and the strategies should be developed appropriately, especially when we talk about food and food security. Unfortunately, sometimes when we talk about food, we talk about only agriculture. It's beyond agriculture. It's all, as I said, almost everybody is involved. You want to talk about food. Now, what should we do to make sure that we achieve what we are looking for in Egypt? Yesterday and again today we heard about maybe reaching 100 billion people in 2020-2025. So there is a huge issue which should be looked at, that what we call the gap between what we produce and what we use or what we consume. And to me, the strategy which has been developed by the Minister of Agriculture with the involvement of major stakeholders, it's a strategy towards 2030. What should be done between now and 2030? And water, of course, is a major element and a major issue for this. What has been done, and I guess Egypt did spend a lot of financial resources for water, and mostly is efficient use of water. And through FAO and to all of the experts, there is still a lot of space to improve the use and efficiency of water resources in Egypt. This is, I guess, can be done. It's been through different interventions, through investors, but we do believe that still, I guess, with research, with extension services, with involvement of, as I said, the major stakeholders, still there can be a lot to be done within this. And when I say this, it's again, how we can improve production when we talk about water resources. And again, it's a very complex issue because Egypt maybe affect this, what we call land fragmentation. Land fragmentation is an issue, and if you want to talk about efficiency in the use of water resources, we have also to consider what to do about land and land fragmentation. And this is a major issue as well, where concerned departments and ministries are working on. So as you can see, when it comes to food, it's a very complex. What we are doing as FAO, maybe just to finish by this, we are trying to take into consideration all these elements, and we are supporting establishing what we call a policy advisory board on food security, where we are trying to bring all the major stakeholders to put heads together and try to find out what can be done for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. If I can take another minute of your time or 2 minutes of your time. And I have to take your expert opinion on this. So let's not represent the United Nations or two, and I will take your personal opinion on this. Maybe a lot of us in this room do not deal on a day-to-day basis with the bread lines and the availability of that very important staple in Egyptian society. So we buy our bread from Carrefour. Now, we've been hearing about a lot of different mechanisms of the distribution of wheat to the bakeries so they can provide subsidized bread that will reach the people that deserve the subsidies on the bread. Now, I've heard of different systems, and now they want to do electronic cards. There's another system where they're going to give the wheat, the grain to you know the ideas that they're coming up with. What is the right way to go about this, in your personal expert opinion? What would be the perfect way to get the bread that is subsidized to the people that deserve it? I know it's a big question, but I am sure you have thought about it, you've talked about it, you've been involved in it. So on your personal expert opinion, very briefly, what would it look like?
See, you are putting to me a difficult question where it's really, it's not a new issue, what has been, I guess, manipulated for years. To us, what I would suggest, I'm not talking directly to this, I mean, maybe you know already and everybody knows, Egypt is #1 importer of cereals in the world. And what can be done, I mean, an expert is first to look into how to deal with this at the production level. Now, when you come to really identify who to directly support, this is already some data which is, you see, not clear about. We are talking sometimes about, let's say, 20% of Egyptians who are really poor, and another 20% which may come down to that. I mean, and yesterday we have given 50%. I mean, so this is the, I mean, to me, this is the issue, how to identify the right people that we, because the mechanisms are there. I mean, that has been tried even in the country and in others. But to me, the most important or the most difficult issue as an expert is really to identify those that really require this direct support to them. And this is still a very complex and very difficult issue, to be frank.
So what you're saying, and I totally agree with you, we don't really need to reinvent the wheel on something like this. And I'm sure there's a lot of systems that work in emerging markets, countries in Africa, countries that support subsidies. But what you're saying is it's the lack of the proper information and identification of those who are really in need. And hence, we need to focus on censuses, surveys, really going down and making sure that these people, because it's very different than subsidies for fuel. That's a little bit more difficult, but yeah, so it is basically the lack of the information and the direction. Do you think we had time to put this together? Is that is that really a bottleneck or a hindering point if we have the Ministry of Information or the Ministry of Tamween, the supply? Shouldn't that be their first step?
I fully agree. That's the first. And there are already, in fact, as I said, even with the Food Security Information Center, called Food Security Information Center, we are in our nation, where it should provide data. And now, I guess we are going a little bit even in depth to make sure that, okay, this data is reliable. You can build up on it. Because there are different, sometimes, institutions, and unfortunately, from one to the other, the data is, to some extent, different. And sometimes we are reaching 20-30% different. So that's why now, I guess even this, what we are talking about now, this Policy Advisory Board on Food Security, number one, let's say, activity or idea is how to come down together with something that is acceptable to all and that can be used. Because we heard sometimes people, they will say, okay, which data is this? The scientific one, the political one, which, and we are coming a little bit to put, as again, because there are so many institutions, departments, ministries who are directly involved in this. And unless we reach that reliable data that can be used to develop, let's say, the mechanisms, or to develop even the programs for the future, that's to me, it's number one, really subject to take into consideration, to look into food security, because food security, as I said, it's not Ministry of Agriculture, it's many who are involved in this, and to some extent, for the moment, that's what we are looking for. As you mentioned, rightly, the data and reliable information, I guess it's really needed to build something, let's say, sustainable or that others can build on.
Thank you very much. Let me move on to Mr. Mohammed Behed from DMA Farms. Mohammed, I've known you for quite some time now, and before you even graduated, and you're a finance student, and I would have probably seen you in banking or investment or anything except when the global financial crisis hit. I think that sort of changed a lot of people's career directions. And now you're working in agriculture as part of some of the things that you're doing. And I believe DMA Farms is not an old establishment, it's a new establishment. You have it in partnership with, as a matter of fact, the Farag family as well, Mohammed Farag Abo. تمام والله فخور بيكم جدا بجد يعني. And you came together and you put this entrepreneurial idea of DMA Farms. Let me ask you a question. As business, young business people, when you looked at the opportunity and started to create your business plan, when we are the largest exporters of grain around the world, of wheat. What did you think of wheat? Importer, sorry. Did you think of wheat? Was it one of the things, commodities that you thought that you could build your business plan on and really, I know you're not going to you provide the whole country with wheat, but was it a direction? Are young entrepreneurs thinking of partial self-sufficiency on wheat, at least? Or did you go up to the exportable items?
As a matter of fact, we did think about wheat, but not to grow it in Egypt for various reasons. But what we do...
Business plan reasons or environmental reasons?
It's actually, it goes along with water. It's more technical stuff, and some of the... It's more economically viable to go to a place to Sudan, for instance, take much more land. You've got more water resources. Let me just give a briefing what we do at DMA Farms. Mohammed Farag actually is the one who started the whole operations in 2002. They started with 100 faddans. Now the company is running 1,500. Yeah, the company is currently managing 1,500 faddans, and and we basically grow exportable fruits, and we just started our vegetable operations. One of the problems with, let me just try to define what food security is, because most of the people talk about food security in terms of only wheat and grain, but actually food security is having the availability of basic items, not necessarily wheat. So we talk vegetables, we talk like dairy products, stuff like that. I'd also like to define how the agricultural industry is segmented. We have 8.5 million fadans of cultivated area. 95% of this is 2 fadans or smaller. These are the farms that are 2 fadans or smaller. So they're basically small farmers. 5% is more than 2 fadans. So you have all the companies, you have the small farmers, the medium farmers, we're talking like 5 fadans, 50 fadans. So a person, if you have 95% of 8.5 million fadans controlled by small farmers, you don't really have much control over the products that they grow, or like any control on the quality. Traceability as well, of course. And when we talk about these people, we were talking in numbers. Most of them grow vegetables, and most of the vegetables that are grown in Egypt come from these people, not from large companies. So we're talking a production of 11.1 million tons of vegetables versus 8.24 million tons of fruits. And I personally don't believe that fruits are considered basic items. People would concentrate on the vegetables. You can't cook an orange, it's okay. So back to your question. We talk about food security. We need to start regulating the small farmers in terms of what crops they should be growing. I'm sure ACDI VOCA has been working on this with the small farmers, trying to develop the idea of contract farming. Okay, and when we talk about managing the water resources, we also need to think of how the whole industry is segmented. So if we're trying to manage the resources manage the water resources through the 95%, and you're telling them to install drip irrigation, that's extremely non-economical. It's not even economically viable for them to invest £6,000 just to have drip irrigation. They have the Nile, and they take all the water they need. And if we calculate this, we're talking about from 8 to 24 billion pounds worth of investments to convert their use of from traditional watering methods to drip irrigation. I personally believe that we can use these funds if they were allocated to different projects, let's say water desalination or other projects that would create more water resources, then it would be much better than trying to focus on what has been established since 7,000 years ago. The other point is all of the bigger companies. Our farm is behind the master on the Cairo Alex Road, so we're in the desert basically, and we use we use underground water basically, so we don't even use the water from the Nile. So we have our own water resources, and what I'm trying to say is
what technologies do you constitute into your farming practices? I mean, since you are a young company and obviously you're all tech savvy, what are you implementing in terms of or putting into technology into what you are doing? I mean, drip irrigation, it's not so much a technology as much as it is just a method, the right method to do it, and also depends on what crop you're talking about. So what's the integration of technology into your farm?
Well, basically, we only use drip irrigation, but one other problem we have, coming back to what Mr. Herb said, is energy.
we don't have electricity in half of our farms, and we use diesel generators. And with the previous crisis of having to find diesel, we have problems with finding resources to start watering our plants because we use energy to basically get pumps and start working on our irrigation. So all of these energy problems, security problems, they would affect the larger companies, but they wouldn't necessarily affect the small farmers with the same impact because they use probably non-legitimate. You understand? I'm not sure if I answered the question because I got interrupted.
You gave us what we needed, definitely. I want to come back to you again. And you're giving me the opportunity to go off to Doug right now and build on something that Mohammed just mentioned. I asked him about, wheat. He said, it's not really viable to do wheat here in Egypt, so we look at Sudan because, it's cheaper, more viable, it's technically feasible. But there's one thing that we have completely forgotten about. I have not heard it being mentioned in any of the government economic plans or whatever weird visions that they're starting to have. But the reality is there is a project called Toshka. The reality is it does exist. The reality is it took one of the mistakes of the previous regime was diluting our foreign reserves in the construction of this very strange kind. It's well-intentioned, there's no doubt about it, as was the Aswan Dam. But at the end of the day, I think it had more damage than it did good. Mr. Anderson, what do we close Toshka? Do we drain out sell the pumps? What do we do? What are we going to do with this little issue that we inherited that could be a potential? Or do we just forget it completely, cut our losses?
I don't think you forget it. I don't think you forget it, Ashraf. It's there, and it is what it is. But certainly, it can be productive. There were some false assumptions that they relied on, and agriculture does require labor, and so you go down to Toshka, and there's just no communities there. There's nobody living there. That said, of course, it can be very, very, very productive. Now, when you talk about wheat, Egypt consumes about 14 million tons of wheat per annum, and they only supply about half of that internally. But I want to come back a little bit because, the idea of this conference was to talk about how do we solve some of these problems that relate to food. And I was talking about exports, and I just want to reassure you that, while we take people to market, that production is not 100% exportable. You're lucky to get about 50 to 60% produce that meets international standards, and so the rest goes into the domestic market. And any time that you can work with producers to meet international standards and to export, you're increasing the supply and the quality of the rest of that crop that goes domestically. Okay, now. You can export 1 ton of strawberries and buy 100 tons of wheat. And so I don't understand the emphasis that's that they're putting on growing wheat here in Egypt when they have the resources available to them to grow specialty crops that are much, much higher in value. And then they can buy all the wheat that they want. It kind of reminds me of when I was working in Saudi Arabia in the early 80s, and they were buying wheat at $17 a bushel. It went down to about 11 by the time I left there, but they could still buy wheat on the spot market for $3.26. Now this is just a complete misallocation of resources there, and I just want to bring you fast forward and remind you that growing wheat may not be the best idea here in Egypt when you have these resources that would earn you that much more. I think productivity is the biggest problem here in Egypt in terms of production. And I just want to give you a quick case study, and then we'll go to something else if you like, Ashraf. But you know, I never worked in tomatoes when I was working with the food processors. They just weren't competitive. They couldn't export. And I didn't realize until we started a supply chain project with Heinz Corporation just how dysfunctional this sector was. Egypt is the 4th or 5th largest supplier of tomatoes in the world, depending on how you want to measure it, area under cultivation or volume, yields. And when we started this project 5 years ago for Heinz, the average yield per Fadan in Egypt was 15 tons per Fadan of tomatoes. They were all table tomatoes, and so Egypt was a net exporter of tomato paste. The processor just could not compete with the rest of the world. By 2010, we turned Egypt into a net exporter of tomato paste. We increased the average yields by double, and if it were not for an invasion of a certain pest in tomatoes, the tomato leaf miner, we would have tripled those yields. But these small farmers, they're not stupid. And I'll tell you, when you start working with them and you start transferring information and technology, I mean, we did 47 trials of varietals. We ended up picking 6 to 7 and transferred those to our farmers. We had 10,500 Fadans of tomatoes under production last season. And we did that by aggregating farmers. So there's no excuse. Most of the food worldwide is grown by small farmers, worldwide, not just Egypt. And so, you know, it's just a matter of putting those resources to work. We aggregated these farmers. We worked with about 6,000 farmers, and we had 10,500 acres under production, and we turned Egypt into a net exporter of tomato paste because they got the right variety and the right bricks, the soluble solids of that tomato. We reduced the conversion cost by 30% to the processors. We had some farmers that reported 82 Fadans per Fadan. Now in California, one of the largest places of tomatoes, of growing tomatoes in the world, their average is 49.5 tons per acre. And a Fadan is just a hair over an acre. And those are mechanized farms. They have economies of scale, and yet our little farmers were meeting that benchmark. Okay? So we had farmers reporting 50. One association in Nuberea averaged 52 tons per Fadan. We had people reporting in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and one as high as 82. So productivity, the lack of information here, and the lack of extension service. They pretend they have an extension service here, but it's broken, it doesn't work. These farmers are thirsting for information, and if you give them the information, they are productive. And so I can tell you right now that your future is dependent on these small farmers, and they can produce.
Thank you, Dr. Really clears it up. Just since I'm on the subject of Tushka, how can we utilize Lake Nasser?
I'm sorry?
Lake Nasser.
Well, I mean, Lake Nasser is, we work with farmers along Western Lake Nasser, New Kalabsha Village, Bashir al-Khair, Tomas and Afia. And they're all using that water, and it goes back, you know, off of the lake a ways, but you know, this is going to take political will and an understanding community, I think, to make Toshka work. I think the potential in Toshka really revolves around exportable produce, grapes. You've got sufficient chill hours down there because you're in the high desert, and so you can grow stone and palm fruits. You can grow a lot of tomatoes there for processing if they so desire. You know what really is lacking in Upper Egypt is a cold chain, and also it's not infrastructure. A lot of people come to me and say, oh, they don't have any roads up there. Oh, they don't have any gas. We can't build a processing plant up there because they don't have gas. It goes all the way to Aswan. There's gas there. There's good infrastructure there. There's a new road from Wadi Dagiga all the way over to Safad, to the port there. And so what is lacking up there is investment. We need more processing plants in Upper Egypt. You know, we extended the supply line of tomatoes in this country from 90 days to 255. There's no other country in the world that has a supply line of tomatoes like that. And this is indicative of what you can do with other crops because of the microclimates in this country and following that sun from north to south. I talked earlier about the agricultural potential in Upper Egypt, and all you have to do is put it to work, but it requires some investment.
I think because I have to put there more and more, Douglas, because I'm learning from him. I'm not here to talk about Toshka, especially because the savior of Toshka is friend of me, and we know very well since many years what is happening in Toshka. And again, I fully agree with Douglas, that is quite political and I don't know what. So, just one thing, not talking about Toshka. I think everyone knows and can see urbanization is going very fast. Urbanization is going fast. Population is growing, and urbanization is eating the agricultural land, productive land. What to do? I think government should think about other kind of Toshkas, to develop other kind of, let's say, organized, with, let's say, maybe training the people, maybe mechanization, maybe etc., to create that. What is happening? We all know that water is going to be something very rare in this country after years, because consumption, because production, because percentage of consumption of the Nile water, etc. As you can see, 91–92% of all the agricultural production in the area around Nile are in Delta area. I'm not going to talk about the warming of climate, etc., that maybe after a few years, some of 30% that, as per statistics, can be under inundation, okay? But what is the difference between small farmers and more organized, let's say, Toshka kind? I'm not doing advertising for that. But irrigation in those categories of small plot of land, Mujahid, please correct me if I'm wrong, it is mainly by inundation, not by pulverization, not by mechanism, not by the time management of irrigation, etc., etc. I think today we have to focus more on productivity, not because money, because saving should be one of the first target of, let's say, this challenge. And as I can see, there are many experts around that they can contribute to make government successful.
I grow soybean.
Thank you very much. Mujahid, let me just ask you a very quick question before I open up the panel to the floor for a couple of questions, if any of you have. Now, I learned this from Doug, that we suffer 60% post-harvest losses on most of our crops here in Egypt. 40%. That's still a very big margin. So, what can we do? I mean, it could solve a lot of problems. I mean, 40%, you know, just to make everybody understand what I'm talking about. You've got 100 acres, and you're gonna plant crops on the 100 acres. It's gonna cost you to plant crops on the 100 acres. And when you come and harvest them, you're only harvesting 60 acres of the 100 acres. And the 40, you basically lose. So you can imagine what we were talking about in terms of efficiency. The reality is, the lack of efficiency that we have is lose 40%, which, who makes profit of 40% except for the bankers maybe, but I'm sure that the small farmers don't make 40% profit margin on most of the crops, except, you know, some crops. But still, how can we address this problem?
Very much. In fact, I was going to talk about this as Doug mentioned, solutions. Yes, in fact, a few months back we had an expert meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, and they were talking about food waste and losses. And you see, there was like an agreement. We are talking about 15 to 20% for meat, up to 30% for vegetables, and up even to 40-50% fruits. And sometimes we ask the question, why should I look to reducing or efficiency of water or lands if I can already, if I talk about 30% or 50% of it, that means 2 million tons. I mean, just I can get them through storage, better storage, maybe better post-harvest. So even those that we import, not even to produce. So in fact, there, to me, there is a space for investors, and especially for the private sector, to get into this and to look into it. And by the way, I should mention that in fact, in a month or two, there'll be in fact a meeting about this, how the private sector would get into this. And we have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, it was mentioned. They are coming to meet with investors and to look into this. And one of the most important things that the ministry is putting on the table is what are these storage mechanisms or let's say facilities that they are there. But unfortunately, again, when we talk about investments, there is a need, I guess, to look, because maybe which I was not mentioned, did we really appropriately invest in agriculture and in food for the last so many years? And I guess now, when you talk about agriculture and food, remember that 30% or more they are getting their direct income from agriculture, and these are the ones that Doug mentioned, the small holders or the small farmers that they are producing for the others. So I guess we have also to look into the investment, both public and private, and to help, and there are potential again for looking for the post-harvest and to this change of production. Thank you.
Just, if you can excuse my ignorance on the subject, really, is this a difficult task? Is this something that we, like we were listening to the panelists earlier, that we will see, you know, we'll see results in 2015, 2030, 2035, I probably won't be alive by then, but is really addressing these post-harvest losses a very, very difficult task?
I think but we, as maybe as mentioned before, we are talking a bit about long-term policies. I guess this is very important when you see, I mean, what should I put my resources within something? Like now we are talking, for example, about storing wheat. I guess it's very simple, but we talk to many of those that they are involved. Unfortunately, there are so many sometimes obstacles that are there, which sometimes doesn't help even the private investors, because there is not the plot of land there where you should put this. Sometimes in other countries they are putting incentives for those that they are coming into to invest. So, I mean, this is not difficult when it comes to the mechanism itself, but you need really an appropriate policy and strategy to support and to encourage and attract those that they have to be there and to implement. Unfortunately, we've seen these smallholders. Again, sometimes if you don't invest in these people, they are going even to leave this place because they cannot make any more the income that they need for them and for their kids, and they will come to you to Cairo. Unless you invest in them, they will not invest in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm being asked to close the panel, so Mohammed, I'd like to give you a word. If anybody has a closing statement, I'm sorry about not taking questions from the floor, but I'm sure you can have discussions on the side.
But it's just a final comment about the small farmers. They're actually doing what I call collaborative farming. Like if you go to certain villages, you'll find that they collaborate together and they start growing a certain crop together and they start marketing together. So for instance, if you go to a place called Markas Badr, they focus, for instance, on strawberries, and then they market it together to exporters, they market it together to producers. So they are doing this. They've reached a point where the government isn't helping them. They don't get the information. They can't reach out to ACDI VOCA because they, you understand. So they're doing it on their own. So I think we can focus on not public-private partnership, but maybe people-private partnership. And if the private sector focuses with these small farmers, I think we can reach there's huge potential. Huge potential.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, it's a very, very good point. And it seems the theme of yesterday and today is we are going to do it alone. I think that is really the theme that we're getting from yesterday and today. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time and for being with us. Thank you very much.